Two police officers lay buried alive beneath the frozen forest floor, their mouths taped and their voices silenced. No sirens were coming, and the snow was erasing the only evidence of their struggle. But when a 9-year-old girl and her German Shepherd followed a faint vibration deep into the woods, they uncovered a secret meant to stay hidden forever. What happened next didn't just save 2 lives, it shocked the entire world. This isn't just a rescue story, it's a miracle caught in a race against time. If you believe heroes come in all shapes and sizes, hit that like button and subscribe, because you won't believe the secret the snow was trying to hide. Now let's go back to the moment the forest went silent. The forest had swallowed the world whole. Snow fell in sheets, thick and relentless, blanketing the towering pines until they looked like ghosts standing watch over something dark. The wind had teeth. It tore through the trees, howling low and dangerous, the kind of sound that made even the strongest men turn back. Everything was white, everything was frozen, and everything was silent except for the storm. Deep beneath the surface, where the cold had already stopped feeling like cold and started feeling like nothing, officers Daniel Harper and Lisa Moreno lay trapped in total darkness. Their wrists were bound behind them, their mouths sealed with duct tape. Snow pressed down on them from every direction, stealing heat, stealing breath, stealing time. They couldn't move. They couldn't scream. All they could do was wait and hope that someone, anyone, would realize they were missing before it was too late. But no one knew where they were. The last GPS ping had been hours ago. The last radio transmission, calm and routine, had promised nothing more than a quick check on a suspicious vehicle. Now that radio sat buried somewhere in the snow, silent as a grave. Above them, the forest showed no signs of struggle. No footprints, no tire tracks, no blood. Just endless white and the brutal efficiency of criminals who knew exactly how to make 2 people disappear. Dispatch had tried calling. Once, twice, a dozen times. The calls went straight to static. At first they assumed it was the weather, the notorious dead zones that plagued the outer woods. But when 30 minutes turned into an hour, concerns sharpened into alarm. Search teams were scrambled, but the blizzard had other plans. Helicopters couldn't fly. Snowmobiles struggled to navigate terrain that shifted with every gust of wind. The forest was vast, unforgiving, and it was winning. What no one in that frantic command center understood was that Daniel and Lisa weren't lost. They hadn't crashed. They hadn't wandered off the trail or fallen through ice. They had been taken, ambushed by men who operated in the shadows of the forest, men who needed them gone and needed it to look like an accident. The snow would do the rest. In a few more hours, hypothermia would finish what the criminals had started, and the forest would keep its secret. Unless someone found them first. 9-year-old Emily had been warned 100 times not to go past the tree line. Everyone in town knew the rule. Once winter hit, the forest became a predator. It swallowed hikers whole, turned experienced hunters around until they didn't know north from south, and hid dangers beneath innocent-looking snow. Sinkholes, frozen streams with thin ice, branches heavy enough to kill if they fell. Even grown men respected the woods in winter. Even trained officers knew better than to go in alone. But Emily hadn't planned on going this far. She had only wanted to breathe, to escape the suffocating silence of an empty house where her father worked doubles and her mother's absence hung in every room like a shadow that wouldn't leave. School had been canceled. The walls felt too close, and the only one who understood, the only one who made her feel safe, walked beside her now. Rex moved through the snow like he owned it. The German Shepherd's dark coat was dusted white, his powerful shoulders cutting through drifts that came up to Emily's knees. His breath rose in steady clouds, his amber eyes scanning the forest with the trained precision of a police canine. He wasn't supposed to be off duty. He wasn't supposed to be out here. But Rex had been Emily's protector ever since the night her world fell apart, and some bonds ran deeper than protocol. At first they stayed close to the edge, just like her father had told her. Emily's boots crunched softly in the snow while Rex padded beside her, calm and alert. She watched him the way she always did, studying the way his ears twitched at distant sounds, the way his nose lifted to catch scents she could never smell. He made her feel brave, even when the wind howled and the trees creaked under the weight of ice. But then something changed. Rex stopped mid-stride, his entire body going rigid. His ears snapped forward, his tail stiffened into a straight line. The playful energy that had carried them through the walk vanished in an instant, replaced by something sharp, something focused. Emily's heart began to pound. "Rex?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. "What is it?" The dog didn't look at her. His gaze was locked on something deeper in the forest, something Emily couldn't see. His breathing quickened. A low rumble built in his chest, not quite a growl, but close. She had never seen him like this, not during training, not during play, not ever. This was different. This was urgent. "Rex, no," Emily said, her voice shaking now. "We're not supposed to go that far." But Rex wasn't listening. He took a step forward, then another, his nose lowering to the ground. He sniffed once, twice, then his entire demeanor shifted. His tail began to wag, fast and frantic, and before Emily could stop him, he bolted. Not away from her, but deeper into the forest, towards something only he could sense. "Rex, wait!" Emily shouted, panic rising in her throat. But the dog was already 20 feet ahead, moving with purpose, his powerful legs churning through the snow. She had no choice. She couldn't lose him. Not here. Not in this storm. So she ran after him, her small boots sinking with every step, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the cold burned her lungs. The trees closed in around her, the wind grew louder, and the world became nothing but white and gray, and the dark shape of Rex moving ahead like a shadow, with a mission. Then, without warning, Rex stopped. He stood in a small clearing, his body tense, his ears pinned forward. And he began to dig. Not the playful digging of a dog chasing a scent. This was desperate, frantic, like his life depended on it. Snow flew in every direction as his powerful paws tore at the ground, his breath coming in sharp bursts. "What are you doing?" Emily whispered, stumbling into the clearing. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Rex, stop, we have to go back." But the dog didn't stop. He dug faster, harder, whining now, a sound Emily had never heard him make. It was the sound of something urgent, something terrifying. And then she heard it. Faint, almost impossible to detect beneath the howling wind. A knock, from beneath the snow. Emily's blood turned to ice. Her eyes went wide. She dropped to her knees beside Rex and pressed her ear to the ground. There it was again, muffled, weak but unmistakable. Someone was down there. Someone was alive. "Oh my God," Emily breathed, her hands trembling as she began to dig alongside Rex. Hold on, we're coming." The snow was deep, far deeper than she expected. Her fingers went numb almost immediately, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Rex worked beside her, his claws scraping through layers of ice and frozen earth. And then, suddenly, his paw hit something solid. Something that wasn't snow. Fabric. Dark blue fabric. Emily's breath caught. She dug faster, her small hands pulling away snow until she saw it. A face. Pale, frost-covered, eyes closed. A man, a police officer. Duct tape covered his mouth. His skin was gray, his lips tinged blue. "No, no, no," Emily whispered, tears streaming down her frozen cheeks. She grabbed his shoulder and shook him. "Wake up, please wake up." The officer's eyes fluttered, just barely, but it was enough. He was alive. And then Rex barked again, sharp and insistent, and Emily realized with horror that there was a second shape in the snow, another officer, a woman, and she wasn't moving at all. The morning had started with silence, the kind that pressed against Emily's chest and made it hard to think. Her father had left before dawn, kissing her forehead in the darkness and whispering that he'd be back late, maybe not until tomorrow. Another double shift. Another day where the house felt too big and too empty all at once. The walls seemed to close in whenever she sat still for too long, and the ticking of the kitchen clock became unbearable after the first hour. School was closed. The storm had seen to that. Through the frosted window, Emily watched the snow fall in thick curtains, transforming the neighborhood into something foreign and silent. Most kids would have been thrilled, would have spent the day inside with hot chocolate and cartoons. But Emily couldn't breathe in that house. Not anymore. Not since her mother had walked out 6 months ago without saying goodbye, leaving behind only the ghost of her perfume and a daughter who kept waiting for a door to open that never would. Rex had sensed it before Emily even reached for her coat. The German shepherd rose from his bed in the corner, his dark eyes watching her with an intelligence that sometimes felt almost human. He knew when she needed him, always had. He patted over and pressed his warm body against her leg, and for the first time that morning, Emily felt like she could take a full breath. Her father's rules were clear. Stay close to the house. Don't go past the tree line. The forest in winter was dangerous, unpredictable, a place where even experienced adults got into trouble. But Emily only needed to walk, to move, to feel something other than the crushing weight of that empty house. Just to the edge, she told herself, just enough for Rex to stretch his legs and for her to clear her head. She bundled up in her green winter coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and pulled on the heavy boots her father had bought her last Christmas. Rex waited by the door, patient but alert, his tail giving a single wag when she clipped on his leash. Not that he needed it, Rex never strayed far from her side. He was trained to protect, to serve, but with Emily, it was something more. He was family. The cold hit her face like a slap the moment they stepped outside. The wind howled through the neighborhood, sending snow spiraling in wild patterns that stung her eyes. Emily pulled her scarf higher and started walking, Rex moving steadily beside her. They passed the last house on the street, then the old fence that marked where the town ended and the wilderness began. This was the boundary, the line her father had drawn in red pen on every warning he'd ever given her. Emily hesitated, her hand resting on the weathered fence post. She looked back at her house, small and dark against the gray sky. Then she looked at Rex, who was already staring into the forest, his ears perked with interest. Just a little farther, she thought, just enough to feel like she was somewhere else, somewhere that didn't remind her of everything she'd lost. She climbed over the fence. Rex leapt over it effortlessly, landing in the deep snow with barely a sound. And together, they disappeared into the pine forest, where the trees stood like silent sentinels, and the world fell away into white. For the first 20 minutes, everything felt almost normal. The forest welcomed them with its strange, muffled quiet, the kind of silence that only exists when snow falls thick enough to swallow sound. Emily's boots crunched softly with each step, and Rex moved beside her with the easy confidence of a dog who knew these woods better than most humans ever would. He sniffed at tree trunks, paused to investigate a cluster of frozen bushes, and occasionally looked back at Emily with what she could have sworn was contentment. She let herself relax, just a little. The tightness in her chest began to ease. Out here, surrounded by towering pines and endless white, she could almost forget about the empty house, about her father's tired eyes, about the mother who had chosen to leave rather than stay. Out here, it was just her and Rex, and that was enough. They walked deeper, following a narrow path that wound between trees so tall they seemed to disappear into the gray sky. Emily knew they'd gone too far, well past the tree line, well beyond where her father would ever allow. But she told herself they'd turn back soon, just a few more minutes, just a little farther. The storm was picking up, She could feel it in the way the wind had started to bite harder. But Rex seemed unbothered, and if he wasn't worried, then neither was she. Then everything changed. Rex stopped mid-stride, so suddenly that Emily almost stumbled into him. His entire body went rigid, every muscle tensing as if someone had flipped a switch inside him. His ears snapped forward, locked onto something Emily couldn't see or hear. His tail, which had been swaying gently, went stiff as a board. "Rex?" Emily whispered, her breath catching. She'd seen him alert before during training exercises, during the rare moments when her father brought work home. But this was different. This was primal. His lips pulled back slightly, not quite a snarl, but close enough to send ice through her veins. The dog took a step forward, his nose dropping to the snow. He inhaled deeply, once, twice, his nostrils flaring. Then he lifted his head and stared at a patch of ground about 15 feet ahead. To Emily, it looked like every other patch of snow in the forest. Undisturbed, unmarked, innocent. But Rex saw something else, sensed something else. A low whine built in his throat, thin and desperate, a sound Emily had never heard him make. It wasn't fear, it was urgency, recognition. The kind of sound a dog makes when every instinct is screaming that something is catastrophically wrong. "What is it?" Emily asked, her voice small against the wind. "Rex, what's wrong?" But the dog wasn't listening anymore. He moved forward slowly at first, placing each paw with deliberate care, his entire focus narrowed to that single spot. His breathing quickened, his body began to tremble, not from cold, but from restraint, as if he was holding himself back from something he desperately needed to do. Then he reached the spot, and the restraint shattered. Rex dropped to his front legs and began to dig, frantically, violently, his powerful paws tearing through snow and ice like his life depended on it. Snow flew in every direction, his breath coming in sharp bursts, his whining growing louder, more insistent. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. She ran to him, dropping to her knees beside him. "Rex, stop! What are you doing?" But he wouldn't stop, couldn't stop, because beneath that undisturbed snow, beneath layers of ice and earth and silence, something was dying. And Rex, trained to protect, trained to save, had found it. Emily's hands plunged into the snow beside Rex's flying paws. The cold bit through her gloves immediately, sharp and vicious, but she didn't care. She dug with everything she had, her small fingers scraping through layers of ice that cut like glass. Rex worked beside her with mechanical precision, his training taking over, each movement purposeful and devastating in its efficiency. Snow accumulated around them in growing mounds, and still they dug deeper. "There's nothing here," Emily gasped, her breath coming in ragged clouds. "Rex, there's nothing." Her fingers hit something solid, not rock, not root, fabric. Her heart stopped. She pulled away more snow, her movements becoming frantic now, matching Rex's intensity. The fabric was dark, navy blue, and as more of it emerged from the white, she recognized the texture. Official. Uniform. Police. "Oh, God," she whispered, the words barely forming. Her hands trembled violently as she cleared away more snow, revealing a shoulder, then a neck, and then finally, a face. Officer Daniel Harper lay beneath the frozen ground, his skin alabaster pale with a grayish tint that made him look more like a statue than a man. Frost clung to his eyelashes, to the dark stubble on his jaw. His lips were tinged with blue, and across his mouth, stretched tight and cruel, was a strip of silver duct tape. His eyes were closed, his body motionless, and for one terrible moment, Emily was certain they were too late. "No, no, no," she choked out, tears streaming down her frozen cheeks. She grabbed his shoulder with both hands and shook him. "Wake up! Please wake up!" Nothing. The officer's head lolled slightly with her shaking, but his eyes remained closed. Rex whined, a high-pitched sound of distress, and pressed his nose against the man's neck, searching for warmth, for breath, for any sign of life. Then Emily saw it, the smallest movement, a twitch beneath the officer's eyelids. His chest, barely visible beneath his snow-covered uniform, rose with a shallow breath. He was alive. Barely, but alive. "You're okay," Emily sobbed, her words tumbling over each other. "You're going to be okay, I promise, I promise." She tried to pull him up, to somehow drag him free, but he was too heavy, and her hands were too numb. Panic surged through her. She needed help. She needed an adult. She needed... Rex barked again, sharp and urgent, but this time he wasn't looking at Officer Harper. His attention had shifted to a spot 3 feet away, another seemingly undisturbed patch of snow. His ears were pinned back, his entire body radiating alarm. Emily's blood turned to ice. "No," she whispered. There can't be." But Rex was already digging again, tearing through the snow with renewed desperation. Emily crawled over to him, her knees sinking deep, and joined him. They dug together, faster now, driven by a horror that had multiplied. Within seconds, more fabric appeared. Another uniform, another person. This time, it was a woman. Officer Lisa Moreno lay even deeper than her partner, her face completely covered in frost, her lips a disturbing shade of purple. Unlike Daniel, whose chest still moved in those tiny, desperate breaths, Lisa was completely still. No movement, no visible breathing. Her skin looked like porcelain, fragile and lifeless. Emily pressed her ear to the woman's chest, listening for a heartbeat she couldn't hear over the roar of her own pulse and the howling wind. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please don't be dead." Rex circled both officers now, whining continuously, his body pressed low as if trying to shield them from the cold with his own warmth. Emily looked around wildly, searching for something, anything that could help. But there was nothing. Just trees, snow, and 2 dying officers who had been buried alive and left to freeze. She was 9 years old, alone in a blizzard, miles from help, and she had just uncovered a nightmare meant to stay hidden forever. Emily's mind raced, spinning through possibilities that all ended the same way. Too far from home, too deep in the forest, no phone, no radio, no way to call for help. The wind shrieked through the trees, and the temperature was dropping by the minute. She could feel it in the way her face had gone numb, in the way her fingers refused to bend properly, even inside her gloves. If she was this cold, what were these officers feeling? What did they have left? She looked down at Officer Harper. His eyes were still closed, but his lips were moving slightly beneath the duct tape, forming words she couldn't hear. She reached for the tape with shaking hands, her fingers clumsy and slow. The adhesive had frozen to his skin, and when she pulled, he flinched, a barely perceptible movement that sent relief flooding through her. Pain meant awareness. Awareness meant life. I'm sorry," she whispered as she tore the tape away. His lips were cracked and colorless, and when his mouth finally opened, only a hoarse gasp escaped, followed by a wet, rattling breath that sounded wrong, sounded like drowning on dry land. "Help," he managed, the word barely audible. His eyes cracked open, unfocused and glassy. "Partner, Lisa." "She's here," Emily said quickly, turning to the female officer. "She's right here, I found her too." But when Emily looked at Officer Moreno, her heart plummeted. The woman hadn't moved since they'd uncovered her. Her chest wasn't rising. Her face was the color of snow itself. And when Emily pressed 2 fingers against her neck the way she'd seen on television, searching for a pulse, she felt nothing but frozen skin. No throb, no warmth, nothing. "No, no, no," Emily breathed, panic threatening to swallow her whole. She grabbed Lisa's shoulders and shook her, harder than she'd shaken Daniel. "Wake up! Please wake up!" Rex suddenly moved between them, his powerful body pressing against Officer Moreno's torso. He laid down directly on top of her, his dark fur stark against her pale uniform, and began shifting his weight, repositioning himself until he covered as much of her as possible. His body heat, generated by his thick coat and his frantic movements, began to radiate against the officer's frozen skin. Emily understood immediately. Rex was doing what his training had taught him, what his instincts demanded. He was trying to warm her, to protect her from the wind that was stealing what little heat remained in her body. She watched as he adjusted again, pressing his chest against Lisa's, his breath creating small clouds of warmth around her face. Daniel made a sound, something between a sob and a cough. His bound hands twitched behind his back. "Can't feel anything," he rasped. "How long were we?" Emily didn't know. She had no concept of how long these officers had been buried, how long they'd been fighting to survive in this frozen tomb. Minutes? Hours? Long enough that one of them had stopped breathing, and the other was barely clinging on. She knelt beside Daniel and began working at the ropes around his wrists. They were industrial zip ties, thick and unforgiving, cutting deep into his skin. She pulled at them uselessly, her small fingers finding no purchase, no weakness. "I can't get them off," she said, frustration and fear making her voice crack. "I can't." "Go," Daniel interrupted, his voice gaining a fragment of strength. "Get help. Run." Emily looked at Rex, still draped across Officer Moreno, his eyes locked on Emily with an intensity that made her chest ache. She looked at Daniel, whose eyes were beginning to clear even as his body shivered violently. She looked at the forest around them, endless and hostile, and she made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She would have to leave them. She would have to run. The decision tore through Emily like a physical wound. Leave Rex. Leave the only thing in her life that made her feel safe, that made her feel whole. The thought of walking away from him, of disappearing into the storm alone, made her want to curl up in the snow and give up entirely. But when she looked at Officer Moreno's lifeless face, at Officer Harper's fading eyes, she knew there was no other option. "Rex, stay," she commanded, her voice breaking on the words. The German shepherd's ears twitched, but he didn't move from his position over Lisa. He understood, the way he always did. His amber eyes met Emily's, and in that gaze, she saw trust, loyalty, and something that looked almost like encouragement. He would hold the line. He would keep them alive, but only if she could bring help in time. Emily stood on shaking legs, her entire body protesting the movement. She was cold, so cold that her thoughts felt sluggish and thick. Her ankle throbbed where she twisted it during the frantic digging, and her hands were starting to lose sensation despite her gloves. The ranger station was northeast, she thought, maybe 2 miles through dense forest. She'd seen it once from the road with her father, a small cabin with a green roof and a radio tower. If she could just find it, if she could just make it there before the hypothermia took her, or the storm erased her tracks completely. "Which way?" she asked Daniel, her teeth chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "The ranger station. Which way?" Daniel's eyes struggled to focus. He lifted his chin slightly, gesturing with his head since his hands were still bound behind him. "Northeast," he gasped. "Follow the ridge line. Don't stop. Don't. Come back. Send them to us." Emily nodded, even though every cell in her body screamed at her to stay, to wait, to not venture out into that killing cold alone. She looked at Rex one more time, memorizing the way his dark fur rose and fell with his breathing, the way his body covered Officer Moreno like a living blanket. "Good boy," she whispered. "Such a good boy. I'll come back. I promise I'll come back." Then she turned and ran. The wind hit her like a wall, stealing her breath and throwing snow into her eyes so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. Her boots sank deep with every step, her legs burning with effort as she pushed through drifts that came up to her thighs. The trees became dark smudges in a world of white, and within seconds, She couldn't see the clearing anymore, couldn't see Rex, or the officers or anything familiar. Terror clawed at her throat. She was 9 years old, alone in a blizzard that was trying to kill her, running toward a building she'd only seen once and wasn't even sure she could find. Her ankles screamed with every step, threatening to give out entirely. The cold was seeping through her coat, through her clothes, settling into her bones like poison. But she didn't stop. She couldn't, because 2 people were dying back there in the snow, and her dog was using his own life force to keep them warm. And if she failed, if she got lost or froze or simply couldn't make it, then all 3 of them would die waiting for a rescue that would never come. Emily pushed harder, her lungs burning, her vision blurring with tears that froze on her cheeks. The forest seemed endless, a maze of white and shadow that all looked the same. She stumbled over a hidden root, went down hard on her hands and knees, tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue. "Get up," she told herself. "Get up, get up, get up." So she did, and she ran on into the storm, a small figure disappearing into the white, carrying the weight of 3 lives on shoulders far too young to bear it. Time stopped meaning anything. Emily couldn't tell if she'd been running for 5 minutes or 50. The world had collapsed into a singular focus, one foot in front of the other, one breath after another. Don't stop, don't think, just move. The ridgeline Daniel had mentioned was somewhere to her right, a dark shadow through the curtain of snow, and she clung to it like a lifeline, using it to orient herself when everything else became a disorienting blur of white. Her ankle wasn't just throbbing anymore, it was screaming. Each step sent lightning bolts of pain up her leg, and she could feel it swelling inside her boot, tight and hot despite the cold. She'd stopped feeling her fingers 10 minutes ago, stopped feeling her face shortly after. Her body was shutting down piece by piece, prioritizing her core, abandoning her extremities to the mercy of the storm. The fall came without warning. Her boot caught on something buried beneath the snow, a branch or a rock, and suddenly she was airborne. She hit the ground hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact, and the air rushed out of her lungs in a painful gasp. Pain exploded through her body, white-hot and all-consuming, and for a moment she couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but lie there in the snow and wonder if this was how it ended. "Get up." The voice in her head sounded like her father's, firm and unwavering. "Get up, Emily. They're counting on you." She tried. God, she tried. But her body refused to cooperate. Her arms shook as she pushed against the ground, and her injured ankle buckled the moment she put weight on it. She went down again, face first into the snow, and a sob tore from her throat. She was failing. After everything, after finding them and digging them out, and running until her legs couldn't carry her anymore, she was going to fail. No. She thought of Rex, his body draped over Officer Moreno, his trust absolute and unshakable. She thought of Officer Harper's fading eyes, his whispered plea for help. She thought of her mother, who had given up and walked away, and she made a promise to herself in that frozen moment. "I am not her. I do not quit." Emily crawled. When her legs wouldn't hold her, she dragged herself forward on her hands and knees, then on her stomach when even that became too much. The snow burned her face, packed into her mouth and nose, but she kept moving. Inch by agonizing inch, she pulled herself forward, following the ridgeline, following the desperate hope that the ranger station existed somewhere ahead. And then she saw it, a shape through the snow, angular and man-made. The green roof barely visible under a thick layer of white. The radio tower swaying in the wind. The ranger station. She'd made it. Emily found strength she didn't know she possessed. She stumbled to her feet, half running, half falling toward the building. Her fists pounded on the door, weak and uncoordinated. "Help!" she screamed, her voice raw and broken. "Please, somebody help!" The door flew open. A man stood there, middle-aged with a thick beard and wide eyes that went wider when he saw the small, frost-covered child collapsing on his doorstep. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, catching her before she hit the ground. "Officers," Emily gasped, her words tumbling over each other. "Two officers, buried alive, tied up, 3 miles southwest. My dog is with them. Please, you have to hurry. One of them stopped breathing. Please." The ranger's face went pale. He pulled Emily inside, already reaching for his radio. "This is Station 7 to dispatch. We have an emergency. I repeat, emergency situation. 2 officers down, possible 1054. Victim reports they're buried and bound. I need every available unit in search and rescue, now." Emily collapsed onto the floor, her body finally giving out. But she'd done it. She'd made it. And now, finally, help was coming. The forest erupted with the roar of engines. 4 snowmobiles tore through the trees, their headlights cutting through the blizzard like searchlights piercing fog. Behind them, a tracked rescue vehicle fought its way through the deep drifts, carrying medical equipment and 3 paramedics who'd been briefed on the worst-case scenario. 2 officers down, buried alive, hypothermic, 1 possibly in cardiac arrest. Minutes mattered. Seconds mattered. Emily sat in the ranger station, wrapped in thermal blankets, her frost-bitten hands cradled in warm water that felt like knives against her skin. The ranger, whose name she'd learned was Marcus, kept talking to her, asking questions, trying to keep her conscious and alert. But all she could think about was Rex, alone in the clearing with 2 dying people, waiting for help that she prayed would arrive in time. "They're almost there," Marcus said, his hand on her shoulder. "You did good, kid. You did real good." Through the static of the radio, voices crackled, sharp, urgent, professional. "Station 7, this is Rescue 1. We have visual on tracks, following now." "Copy that, Rescue 1. Medical is right behind you." The seconds stretched into eternities. Emily closed her eyes and saw Rex's face, saw Officer Harper's glazed eyes, saw Officer Moreno's colorless lips. "Please," she thought, "please let them be alive." Then the radio exploded with sound. "We've got them! We've got them! 2 officers down, German Shepherd on site. Need medical now, now, now." The rescue team descended on the clearing like a controlled storm. Headlights illuminated the scene in harsh white light. Rex sitting upright beside Officer Moreno, his fur caked with snow, his eyes fierce and protective. Officer Harper was conscious, barely, his body racked with violent shivers. But Lisa Moreno hadn't moved. She lay exactly as Emily had left her, pale as death, her chest dangerously still. "Get the dog back," someone shouted. But Rex refused to move until a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Rex, aus!" The command came from one of the officers, someone who knew him. And finally the shepherd relented, stepping aside but keeping his eyes locked on the medics as they swarmed Lisa's body. The lead paramedic, a woman named Sarah Chen, dropped to her knees beside Lisa and pressed 2 fingers against her neck. Her face remained professionally neutral, but her voice carried an edge of alarm. "No pulse. Starting CPR." Her hands locked together over Lisa's chest, pressing down in rapid compressions that seemed brutal in their force, but were calibrated to restart a heart that had stopped beating. 1, 2, 3, 4, she counted, her voice steady despite the chaos. Another medic tore open Lisa's uniform and attached defibrillator pads to her frozen chest. "Charging," he called out. "Clear." Lisa's body jerked as the shock surged through her. The monitor remained flat, a single unbroken line that screamed failure. Sarah resumed compressions immediately, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. "Come on, Lisa, come on, don't you quit on me." Meanwhile, 2 other medics worked on Daniel, cutting away his zip ties, wrapping him in thermal blankets, starting an IV line to combat the hypothermia that was killing him from the inside out. He was talking, barely coherent, saying Lisa's name over and over like a prayer. "Charging again," the medic announced. "Clear." Another shock, another flat line. Sarah's jaw tightened. She'd been doing compressions for 3 minutes straight, and her arms were beginning to burn. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop. "Switch out," another paramedic said, moving to take over, but Sarah shook her head. Not yet. Her hands pressed down again, forcing blood through Lisa's body, forcing oxygen to her brain. "Come on, officer. You don't get to die on my watch. You don't get to make that little girl's run meaningless." The monitor beeped once, a single blip, then another. "I've got a rhythm," someone shouted. "Weak but present." Lisa Moreno gasped, her body convulsing as her lungs remembered how to breathe. The clearing erupted in controlled celebration, and Rex, standing guard at the edge of the chaos, finally allowed himself to sit, his mission accomplished. The intensive care unit at County General hummed with the quiet efficiency of machines keeping people alive. Officer Daniel Harper occupied one room, stable but sedated, his body slowly warming under heated blankets while fluids dripped steadily into his veins. 3 doors down, Officer Lisa Moreno lay motionless in a bed surrounded by monitors that tracked every fragile beat of her recovering heart. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic. She'd survived the field resuscitation, survived the airlift to the hospital, survived the initial hours of rewarming that were often the most dangerous. Her body temperature had climbed from a deadly 79 degrees to a more stable 94. But her heart remained weak, damaged by the prolonged oxygen deprivation in the brutal cold. Every hour she held on was a small victory, but no one was ready to call it a miracle yet. Emily sat in the hallway outside Lisa's room, her bandaged hands folded in her lap. Her father had arrived an hour ago, tears streaming down his face as he'd pulled her into an embrace so tight she could barely breathe. He hadn't let go for 10 full minutes, whispering, "Thank God, thank God, thank God," like a mantra. Now he sat beside her, one arm still wrapped protectively around her shoulders, both of them waiting for news they weren't sure they wanted to hear. Rex lay at Emily's feet, his head resting on his paws, his eyes fixed on the closed door of Lisa's room. Hospital policy explicitly forbade dogs in the ICU, but the hospital administrator had taken one look at the exhausted German Shepherd who'd kept 2 officers alive in a blizzard and made an executive decision. Rex had earned the right to stay. The machines in Lisa's room maintained their steady rhythm for 3 hours. Then, at 11:17 p.m., something changed. A nurse who'd been checking vitals suddenly straightened, her eyes locked on the cardiac monitor. The rhythm that had been weak but consistent began to stutter, skipping beats, losing coherence. "Doctor," she called, her voice sharp with alarm. "We're losing her." The hallway exploded with movement. Medical staff rushed into the room as alarms began to shriek. Emily jumped to her feet, her father holding her back as they watched through the window. Inside, Lisa's body jerked as doctors worked frantically, hands moving in practice choreography over her failing heart. The monitor flatlined, one long, unbroken tone that cut through every other sound in the world. "Charging!" someone shouted. "Clear!" Lisa's body arched off the bed. The line remained flat. They charged again, shocked again. Nothing. Emily felt tears streaming down her face, felt her father's grip tighten on her shoulders. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything. Not after Emily had run through a blizzard, after Rex had given everything he had, after they'd fought so hard to save her. Then Rex moved. He surged to his feet and pressed against the window, his nose leaving fog prints on the glass. And he barked. Not the alert bark Emily knew from the forest, not the playful bark from their walks. This was something primal, something desperate, a sound that carried grief and refusal and command all at once. It echoed through the hallway, making nurses jump, making doctors glance toward the commotion. "Rex," No, Emily whispered, reaching for him. But the dog barked again, louder, more insistent, his entire body vibrating with the force of it. Inside the room, a doctor pressed down on Lisa's chest one more time. Come on, Lisa, come back. The monitor beeped. Once, twice. A rhythm stuttered to life, weak and irregular but unmistakably there. I've got a pulse, someone shouted. Sinus rhythm establishing. Rex went quiet immediately, his tail beginning to wag slowly. He sat back down, calm now, as if he'd known all along that she would come back. Emily stared at him, then at the window where Lisa's chest was rising and falling with assisted breaths, and she felt something shift in her understanding of the world. Some things couldn't be explained by science or logic. Some bonds ran deeper than training or instinct. Some miracles just needed a witness to believe in them. The investigation moved swiftly once officers Harper and Moreno were stable enough to give their statements. What had started as a routine patrol call had turned into an ambush orchestrated by a criminal network that had been using the remote forest roads to transport stolen goods for months. The officers had stumbled onto a drop point, and the criminals had made a calculated decision. 2 officers buried in a blizzard would look like a tragic accident, lost in the storm, bodies not found until spring. By then the operation would have moved on, leaving no trace. They hadn't counted on a 9-year-old girl and a German shepherd who refused to give up. Within 48 hours, federal agents had arrested 4 men connected to the operation. Search warrants executed on 3 properties uncovered stolen electronics, pharmaceuticals, and evidence of a trafficking network that stretched across state lines. What Emily and Rex had uncovered wasn't just 2 officers in the snow. It was the thread that unraveled an entire criminal enterprise. 3 weeks later, Officer Daniel Harper walked out of the hospital on his own 2 feet, still weak but alive. He'd lost 2 toes to frostbite and would carry scars on his wrists from the zip ties for the rest of his life. But he was alive. Officer Lisa Moreno took longer. The damage to her heart required surgery, and the doctors warned her recovery would be measured in months, not weeks. But she was breathing on her own, talking, and according to the nurses, asking about the dog who'd saved her life every single day. The ceremony took place on a crisp afternoon in late February, when the snow had finally begun to melt and the first signs of spring were pushing through the frozen ground. The town square was packed with people, news cameras, and uniformed officers from 3 counties. A small stage had been erected in front of the police station, draped in blue and gold bunting that snapped in the cold breeze. Emily stood beside Rex, her hand resting on his head, both of them uncomfortable with the attention. She wore a dress her father had bought especially for the occasion, and Rex wore a new collar, black leather with his badge number embossed in silver. They'd been interviewed a dozen times, photographed 100 more, and Emily was tired of telling the story. But her father had insisted this was important, that some things needed to be witnessed and remembered. The police chief stepped to the microphone, his voice carrying across the crowd. We're gathered here today to recognize extraordinary courage in the face of impossible odds. On January 5th, 2 of our officers were targeted by criminals who believed they could bury their crime along with their victims. They were wrong, because they didn't account for the determination of a 9-year-old girl and the instincts of a K-9 officer who refused to stop searching. He gestured to Emily and Rex. Emily Martinez, would you and Rex please step forward? They climbed the stairs together, Rex's nails clicking on the wooden steps. The chief knelt down to Emily's level, his eyes kind. What you did took more courage than most adults will ever need in their entire lives. You saved 2 officers, helped dismantle a criminal operation, and showed this community what real heroism looks like. He hung a medal around Emily's neck, gold and heavy, engraved with the city seal and the words Civilian Valor Award. Emily touched it briefly, then looked at Rex, who sat perfectly still beside her, his attention fixed on something in the crowd. She followed his gaze and saw officers Harper and Moreno standing near the front. Daniel was on crutches, and Lisa was in a wheelchair, still too weak to stand for long periods. But they were both smiling, both alive. The chief turned to Rex and produced a second medallion, this one designed for the K9 unit, with a paw print etched into bronze. He clipped it to Rex's collar with practiced ease. Rex, for extraordinary service, for refusing to abandon your mission, and for having the instinct to listen when it mattered most, the department awards you the K9 Valor Medal. Rex's tail wagged once, twice, and the crowd erupted in applause. Emily knelt and wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his fur. "Good boy," she whispered, the same words she'd said in the forest. "Such a good boy." Later, after the ceremony ended and the cameras finally left them alone, Officer Lisa Moreno wheeled herself over to where Emily and Rex stood with her father. She looked tired, her skin still pale, but her eyes were clear and bright. "I wanted to thank you," she said simply, "both of you." Emily didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. But Rex stepped forward and placed his head on Lisa's lap, and she stroked his fur with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't leave me," Lisa whispered to the dog. "When I stopped breathing, when I stopped fighting, you didn't leave." Rex licked her hand once, gentle and deliberate, and in that moment, Emily understood something profound. Heroes didn't always wear badges or carry guns. Sometimes they wore fur and 4 legs, and sometimes they were just 9-year-old girls who refused to let the people they loved die alone in the snow. The forest would always remember what happened that day, and so would they.